Yes.
Feeling me.
It's nice.
Rolling
That's
birds,
right.
pocket
Like
penguin.
Ben's
What?
in
Oh, good idea. I would have
What you
forgotten
thought
that
was
again.
like, somebody broke into my house a few times recently.
Oh, I
Yeah.
just got over that. 18 months of it.
Oh, that's horrible.
That's why I'm so happy. Please got over it.
Oh, that's good. Congratulations.
You call me Stucky.
All right. Toward the end of the talk last time, I tried to place a lot of stress on experience.
Not too much stress, I hope.
One does not study mysticism in the same way you study literature or something academic like that. If you do that, you separate yourself from the object of your attention. And when you do that, you set an object-subject relationship which makes it hard to experience something. Now, there is a place in the world for that kind of knowledge, that kind of education, and it's a perfectly fine thing to do, but it's not what we're doing. The experimental example that we used last time for the first principle, these first talks are probably all of this year are going to be on first principles, which if you get them thoroughly in your consciousness or find them thoroughly in your consciousness, progress in mysticism goes much faster. The experiential example we talked about last time was intuition. We said that in intuition, one enters into unity with the universal truth of things, because that universal truth of everything is in everything. And when you experience an intuition, you're experiencing that universal truth. And some would say that one is in unity with the object of your attention. But that isn't exactly so. It's a little bit misleading. What it really is that one experiences unity. And if you have trained yourself to be able to enter into the intuitive moment, you can go into that so that it is a full-blown mystical experience. So the unity or the experience of intuition is more than just a knowing that something is true. It is a mystical experience, and there are no limits to mystical experience. Now, because we're capable of doing this and not letting things slip out of our minds, so to speak, doesn't mean that it's easy. In fact, anyone who has ever tried to be able to hold one's attention where one wants it to be held understands that that is not an easy thing at all. It is quite difficult. But nobody said it was going to be something that was easy, and it's not supposed to be something that's easy. We're talking about something that, if we can get our consciousness into it, is very precious. It's precious in a way that nothing else in the world has value like that. If it takes a lot of time, if it takes years to get even just a little bit better in control of our attention of consciousness, it's worth it. How else are we going to spend our time? Are we going to enjoy ourselves eating pie or something like that? We're talking about something that is of ultimate value. Now, there are other kinds of many mystical experiences in our daily lives that we don't recognize are mystical experiences. If we did, And if we cultivated them in ourselves, or we cultivated ourselves in them, our growth in consciousness would be much, much faster. Again, repeating the principle from last time, everything is in everything. It is in our little lives. Our little lives are of the same reality as everything else in the cosmos. The realms that we try to reach in mystical experience are not something distant. If there is a sensation of distance, that is a psychological attitude on our part that we feel far away from something. Max Heindel, who was a great mystic, used to like to say about things of spiritual nature that they're closer than hands or feet. And that's really what it is like. Now, of these many mystical experiences, there's another one that probably everyone in this room has had. And it is involved with the elementary principle of the type we're studying. And so we're going to discuss that this evening. We'll examine it just a little bit. Sometimes we're trying to learn something. We're trying to know something, or we're trying to do something. Maybe we want to learn about trees, or maybe we want to be able to draw. Often we already have some knowledge or some experience, but we just have a curiosity. And that curiosity is what leads us into the quest. After some time of putting forth the effort, we usually get our desire, because there is no failure. As long as we keep at something, we can get what we want to get to. And something happens when that happens, when we come to what we wanted to know. At that moment, when we realize what we were trying to get to, there are too many mystical experiences that we don't usually recognize as mystical experiences. The first one is like the experience that we have when we find something that was lost. We say to ourselves, it was right there in front of me all the time. It's a feeling of discovery, or in the case of a lost object, of rediscovery. But there is a sense of timelessness when it occurs, because there is a great relaxation, a relaxation away from the tension of looking for it, or a relaxation away from this kind of activity into a relief. You know, we feel really good in that moment. Now, discovering a lost fountain pen is not as important as discovering one's true self, but it is the same kind of moment, whether it is either. In fact, discovering one's true self can be parlayed out of the first experience, when you find something that was lost, or when you come to know something that you didn't know before. So it's the product of some kind of activity, a search, or something that we have built up a lot of tension until we come to the point where we feel really good. If it is a discovery of something, there is the aha experience. For what it's worth, this is something that we can practice. We lose things all the time because we don't keep our consciousness total. And when we lose something, we get into an attitude of lost. And a lot of the human condition is an attitude of lost. Lost from a life of purpose, lost from a life of meaning. And so the whole idea of thinking found is very, very important. It's something that we can culture. This is another one of those many mystical experiences that we can cultivate, and in this case we do so by anticipation. And just the very fact that we appreciate it, and the fact that we encourage it, and the fact that we believe because everything is in everything, there's no reason why something should be lost, that we should be able to draw ourselves to it, especially since we knew it existed at one time already. It's something that's really available to us. It's more than just a matter of anticipation that closes us, and it's more than just a pleasurable experience. Because if we were only to seek that, this could become selfish and indulgent, just like a lot of other things that we do. This is probably what is meant, if you are someone who's interested in the Bible, when it says, pray knowing that what you pray for will be given unto you. It is just another way of saying, anticipating that this is bound to happen. It's another way of having faith in the universal spirit as it is manifest in you. So if we ask, believing, and if we seek believing, we're sure to find. That's one of the two mystic experiences that happens when we discover something or we find something that's been lost. The other many mystical experience at that moment is something that all of us, I'm certain, have had. It is the experiencing of a principle that in the process of knowing, one also senses not knowing. That is, in the process of sensing knowing, we know that there's something that we do not know. Now, this could be said in a much more formal, philosophical, or epistemological way, but that isn't what we want to do. We hear it more often in common language from people every day. When somebody says, I have more questions than I have answers. Or when somebody knows a lot about a subject and you start asking them about that, and they say, there's so much that I don't know, and it's much more than I do know. We've all heard that. In this regard, it's something like sculpture. When a piece of sculpture has been created and finished, it's something like coming to complete knowledge. It's a fulfilled experience. And when we look at that piece of sculpture, probably Rodin was the most excellent at it. When we look at it, we sense and understand that object. And sometimes the understanding is very, very big and very complex. I once spent 2 hours looking at one head. The head was about that high. It was the head of Akhenaten, and there were 2 of them. And they were both huge like that. And one of them I didn't get anything from. But the other one, if I moved my body or my eye just the least little bit, there was a totally different expression on the face. And I was astounded that somebody could make a stone object and from thousands of years ago, and all of those expressions, or the ability to experience and understand all of those expressions, was carried over all that time in stone. It was really quite something. but you also know more than that beautiful piece or that object that the artist has created. Because if a piece of sculpture is good, it makes you aware of everything that's around it. The light, it makes you aware of space itself. It's as if the solid object that is the piece of sculpture is a hollowing out of the reality of all space, and that when you experience that piece of sculpture, you also experience all of space. It's called negative space. So, this brings to our consciousness something beyond the object, something that is not definite. It's something indefinite. And sometimes that brings a kind of metaphysical ambiguity. What is the reality? Is it the space or is it the object? The experience is the experience of both, but you don't know, which is important. Some would say, if you didn't have the space, you wouldn't have, there couldn't be the object. But the other would say, but it's absurd to not think of the object as being important. So when we are in this ambiguity about truth and about ourselves, when we know something and we realize how much more there is that we don't know, the ambiguity is such that we know intuitively that this truth is true. It's intuitively clear to us. It's undeniable. And any intuition always comes along with a way that you can prove it if you have doubts. Then we think about what we don't know, all of those other questions that come up. And then there is one general type of question that sums them all up. And you say to yourself, what else don't I know that is important? So we have both a knowing and a feeling of certitude and a feeling of questioning at the same time. By the time we're keenly aware of this experience, we're probably far enough along as truth seekers so that both sides of the ambiguity are seen as one, and that ambiguity is healthy. On one hand, by the questioning side of things, we're humbled. But when we're humbled, we're open. And when we're opened, our curiosity is piqued. On the other hand, we have knowledge that we can know. And if you've had one experience, intuitive experience, you know right then and there it can happen again. That it isn't just once for all and then you're done. Since the experience is intuitive, the optimism and confidence are evidence of our divinity. Sometimes we, in our personal nature, are astounded and we say, did I say that or did I make that? Because that is a true humbling of the personal nature, but in a recognition that there is something that works in us, a divine something that is wondrous beyond our experience. So all of us have experienced this kind of knowing. And this kind of knowing brings us to an awareness of our unknowing. And it gives us a lot of questions. I have never ever given a talk that I felt that I had answers that didn't produce a whole flock of new questions. It's like that with everything. Now let's try for a little bit, for the next few minutes, even though it's exceedingly difficult and it's beyond my capacity to put it clearly in words, let's examine this a little bit. The reason talking about this principle is so difficult is in part the limited nature of our current consciousness. Our current consciousness is only a small subset of divine consciousness. Moreover, we are addicted to materialism. We're addicted to seeing things as objects, material objects. So much so that we can't make advancements spiritually until we let go a lot of our materialistic way of thinking. We don't have to be insecure. What we know from material truth will still be material truth. But if we let go of it, we might discover something more, something else that is beyond the little material bits that we have. Because of this, there are a lot of spiritual sayings that describe the nature of spiritual consciousness relative to the nature of materialistic human consciousness. One of them is, the ways of God are strange to the ways of men. And speaking in that intuitive, inward, still, small voice, my ways are not your ways. So if we wish to study this little tiny principle at the level of supreme or ultimate being, we're very likely to get in our own way because we're stumbling with our materialistic consciousness. It's not a cop-out for my inability to put this into words, but it is part of it. If we consider this principle at the level of supreme or ultimate being, we're talking about pure unity. Consciousness in pure unity is very different from the consciousness of specific material things. They're a very different kind of consciousness from each other. It's true we have more wakingness in these small material things, but it's a very different kind of consciousness. I'm happy to have the waking experience of it. So, consciousness of pure unity and specific things are something different. In pure unity, as we spoke of when we spoke of everything is in everything, in pure unity there isn't everything. There's only being. And it is the purest and highest order of being. Some metaphysical philosophers, mystical philosophers, have experienced very high transcendental states of consciousness. States of consciousness that are even beyond ideas. And they say that there is a greater reality to pure being than there is to the reality of things, like shoes or stones or things like that. Because there are no words, if they're not even ideas, there are no words, they coin words to try to talk about this. And you'll often read words like authentic existence, like this is the real thing compared to this which has a more illusory experience. When we ponder this kind of unity, we very quickly arrive at those very deep and very simple statements. And if we put too much of our consciousness in them all of the time, they become trite. Because we can't live, we have to have the spiritual consciousness to live those simple realities, or else they are just platitudes. We spoke of them last time. When we come to things like supreme states of being, or supreme beings, we run into a lot of very unusual things. Some statements are, one mystic said, God is God to God. Meaning to say, what we, even in our notions, have as an idea of awe and of reverence, that the one has to itself, or that the one has from itself. Meister Eckhart, the great German mystic, 14th century mystic, had profound experiences. And the way he chose to say it is God is enjoying itself. When we sense these things, even in our many mystical experiences, what we have is a feeling like perfect self-sufficiency. Every mystic that has talked about these states beyond ideas has said that very thing. It doesn't need anything else. Of course, from our point of view, it's a very different thing. And we find ourselves asking questions like, if the Supreme Being is completely self-sufficient, why is there everything else? Now, different people will have theological speculations about that. And some might say it's charity. And that our differentiation into individuals coming to that same consciousness is an act of charity, which is a way the one enjoys itself in itself. And that's a very beautiful way to look at it. However, to have the whole creation just to be charitable or to be just enjoying itself is not, at least to me, satisfying. You can't, I think it's a partial truth, because we can see manifestations of that, because we all love our children. And we love our children, we bore them because we wanted someone to give to, and we give them the very best of everything that we have. We enjoy them, but not exclusively for our enjoyment, but we enjoy them, we do this because we love them. And we give them everything. So the whole idea, even though it isn't the whole picture, is not a bad idea. It's not a bad way of life. And all those people who are having children and bringing them up to be the best children and to give them the best opportunities to enjoy life are not doing the wrong thing. But it's more than that. So when people say, we ask somebody, what's the purpose of life? And they say, well, you grow up and you have children. And at first that seems shallow, but when you think about it deeply, there is a meaning to it. But there's more. There is not enough. I suspect that you could look at a number of different theological rationales for the creation. And I suspect that each and every one of them would have a good dose of truth, just like the charity rationale. But I suspect that none of them would be completely satisfactory, though that's only a guess. And all of them put together might not be satisfactory. Now, the principle we're discussing in this talk does pretty well at giving an explanation for this and for describing something that we experience in ourselves, and that our spiritual lives are much better if we do practice and experience it in ourselves. At the level of supreme being, at the level of the one of complete unity, there is no everything else. Even though there may be the entire creation and all of the different states of manifestation relative to complete unity, those things are incidental. They're incidental relative to essential being or authentic existence. I don't know what words you want to use. That is what is ultimately important, and everything else is incidental. All there is being, conscious of being, and we know from our own experience, the little progress that we have made, that there is more and more joy the deeper we sink into that being. So we can see that it's an experience that is ultimate. Not an ultimate, but the ultimate. But then comes another one of those nagging questions. And that is that all? Just because God is everything, or the one is universal, doesn't mean there can't be more. If you put it in street language, just because there's all being and because there's self-sufficiency doesn't mean there can't be more of itself to itself. Now when we say more, we're using the word in a spiritually qualitative way, not a quantitative way. Not like there are more potatoes or something like that. In the experience of being, knowing being, in an analogous way to the way that when we know something, we know there is a lot that is not, there is a sense of certainty, but there is also the sense of there could be something else. This is where things are really, really very difficult. In the experience of knowing, we can know that there is much that we do not know. But we can't know what it is that we don't know. If we did, we would know it. We do have questions, and we do have hypothetical propositions and things like that to lead us into knowing it or to bring it into our knowing. Similarly, a state of supreme being can't know non-being. It's impossible to know non-being. But one can sense it. We have a concept of non-being, and we can know that concept, but we can't know the non-being because it isn't. We can know what is and not anything else, or not anything that isn't. So we have this sense that there could be more. And that sense of there could be more is potential. It is potential being which becomes, in its awareness or in the awareness of it, in the realization of it, the potential becomes being. This means to say that there may be something absolute, something that we look at with our concept of non-being because we can't know it, and it is something that even the One doesn't know, but it senses it. It senses in the same way we sense that there's a lot we don't know about even our best skill. And when we sense that, we have a way of bringing it into being. And because everything is everything, that potential has to be in the same unity, even though it's in a potential state, as manifest being, or we couldn't even know it. We couldn't even sense it. It's hard to put a word in there. We certainly don't mean sense as in sense perception. Now at this point you can see what we're talking about becomes circular logic. And it gets tiresome very quickly. And it becomes unsatisfactory. So it's not wise to spend a whole lot of time doing this. I find that it is a well that is always fruitful, always productive of living water if you go back to it from time to time. But if you try to stay there, you just can't do it. But this should be enough to give an inkling, a very imperfect inkling about how common experience is based on the very most profound principle of creation. And how when we enter into that experience in our daily living, that it leads to all kinds of rich spiritual experience, or it leads to creativity. Now, one thing should be obvious from all this elementary pondering, something that is like a corollary to what we've talked about, is that it is a principle of creation. The creation isn't just new to us. We aren't just new to the creation. There is a newness that is a newness to the One, to the ultimate unity. It can't be any other way. How can it be new to us and not be new? This is something that this is part of the way that the One is enjoying itself. When things pass from potential non-being, the process is productive of something new. It is a creative process. Now there's another principle in this which we'll come to in several talks from now that carries this into creation, but it's just too much for now. For now, it's just enough to say that there is a hypothetical dualism within unity that leads becoming being into being, and that it's sort of impossible to state, but certainly possible to experience. Now, when we say things like that, it's nice to be able to put things into words, and probably some people can put them into much better words. But we're not trying to do metaphysical tricks. We're not trying to do something of pseudo-logic. What we're trying to do is put something into a form we can experience. And we're trying to take these universal principles and bring them into our lives. We want to live more lively lives. I don't know how to put it any other way. We want to be quick, spiritually quick. Now this gives us enough of a glimpse of this principle to have some kind of verbalization of the principle that we're talking about tonight. We're trying to put these things into maxims so that we can have catchphrases that can bring our consciousness to the point that we don't forget them. There is none really that perfectly suits this principle, so I just made up a rather ragged statement. In knowledge, there is dualism, and in dualism, there is knowledge, and both are creative. In knowledge, there is dualism, and in dualism, there is knowledge, and both are creative. There is one maxim that doesn't quite hit the nail on the head, and it's a common saying, and it is, truth is a double-edged sword. And there's another one that is a side effect that every one of you that have had this experience of knowing something and realizing how much more you don't know, is that one cannot know something without knowing self at the same time. Every time we make a discovery about something, we make a rediscovery of ourself. Because ourself is the truth knower. So we discover the self in things, but in things we find ourself. It's very, now when we look at these statements, they're not like what we've been talking about on the level of the one. And they don't sound like all of that metaphysical propounding from the early part of this talk. This is by intention, because now we want to look at it more in terms of our daily lives, and we want to see what it means for us in our experience. What we're talking about is division and diversity. Obviously, the world that we live in, even just the material part of it, to say nothing of the energies and the emotions and everything else, the world that we live in is very diverse. It's a far cry from Supreme Being, and its deep simplicity, but everything is in everything, so all of this diversity had to have been possible in supreme unity and simplicity. How does this come to be? This is something that very deep philosophers, the Platonists, spent centuries on the problem of the one and the many, is the way they looked at it, and they tried to look at it very much in a rationalistic way, and they did beautiful, beautiful things. We're not going to try to be quite that rationalistic about it. Now, we can't answer this question in a really comprehensive cosmological study at this time. That would be way too much. What we can, however, speak about is one principle at the root level. That is the most basic level of creation, the principle of division. If we look at the diverse world around us, it is obvious that there had to have been all sorts of divisions within the one to arrive at this complex condition. Now there are all sorts of divisions that are possible. In mathematics, just looking at integers. We can divide by 1, we can divide by 2, we can divide by 3, and we can carry on all the way out to a potential infinite. However, in all of these, they are all variations on the most basic form of division, the division by 2. Something is either this or it is that. One might even say that all forms of division are forms of simple binary division. One can simulate any form of division by binary division or by binary logic. That's what we do with our computers. Everything that we see in our computers, even all of the moving atoms and things like that, are all accomplished by binary yes, no, true, false kind of division. It's kind of, divisive logic. Now you might say, object to saying that this world is a simulation in that statement, on analyzing the world in that way. But if you think about it, nothing really is final. No matter how fine you try to divide something into the smallest possible particles and such, you're never finished, you're never complete. All we have, especially through our senses, is a simulation of the world. And from our measurements, we understand that the world is a simulation, that it is an ongoing simulation. Now, the fundamental division that we're talking about is an internalization of the basic relationship of the one and the potential, the unknown and the known, being and non-being. It can't be anything else. That is the most basic division of all. Again, just like when we come to know something, there's a lot more that we don't know. Now, even though it seems like the unknown that we lack is outside of us, due to our current materialistic consciousness where everything is outside of us, and it's also in part due to the fact that we tend to project things from within, it is actually a realization of something that is interior. Everything is interior to the one. It is all within unity. This is important for us to remember if we aspire to participate in the ongoing creation in a larger sense, which is what mysticism is all about. This way of looking at things, which is not the only way of looking at things, the creation is all about being from non-being. This way of looking at things, which is certainly not the only way of looking at things, it is all of manifest creation, is a condensation of the unknown by the known. A creative dream, you might think. Some call it a cosmic scheme. In this way of looking at things, which is not the only way of looking at things, creation is a hypothetical experiment. The alchemists called it the great experiment. At the same time, it is a great creation. It is a great creative gift. It's not like a neurotic pondering of to be or not to be. This doesn't mean that the universal spirit is a neurotic artist or anything like that. At the supreme level of being, at the supreme level of consciousness, everything is within. Everything is in unity. So an externalization of non-being in potential is not a problem. It's within it. It's not the same problem as it is for us. Exactly how the non-being becomes being, how the unknown becomes known, or how the potential is realized is way too big for tonight. And it's way off topic. Eventually I have a whole series of talks on that very subject, and we'll get to it. But after saying that, we'll make one point about that kind of doing. When we become self-conscious beings, we participate in that activity of realizing. We become creators. We become realizers. We become knowers who take the unknown and make it known. We become finalizers of things that have been indefinite. Just like when we have that intuitive experience, we know it's true. We can't be fooled by it. Say that we don't know it. We realize the truth of things, and we can do so thoroughly with intuition that we can prove it. We can even prove it to others who are skeptical. All of these things point to the fact that we are co-creators. This means there are as many realizations to the creation as there are beings in the creation, which is such a huge, fabulous conception. It's all one creation, but as each one comes into the one, the whole creation has a whole different outlook on it. This is something marvelous beyond our conception at this point. So we have to refocus again. This is one of those things. The poet Rainer Maria Rilke describes Beethoven as trying to condense a music that always wants to evaporate and expand away, and try again to bring this down to earth. It always goes back to that gigantic metaphysical picture of everything. So let's refocus again. Because we are co-creators does not mean that we are anywhere near our creative potential. To take that to the level of the supreme, this means that on one hand, we are much more than the fault-filled humans that we are. But in that much more, we are not very far. So we can't become puffed up and full of ourselves. Because we are junior creators does not mean that we can linger at the gate of paradise between being and not being. Again, if we try to do so, we become saturated and we become superficial. In knowledge, there is dualism, and in dualism there is knowledge, and both are creative. The moment of knowledge is a creative moment, because actually we put some of our divine being into that. That is part of the realization of the divine dream. The other statement we're looking at is truth is a double-edged sword. In our daily lives, as we live them, our duties are much more a matter of particulars than they are of universals. The problems we have to solve are more often specific problems and not general cases. For example, we have to try to help to cure a specific patient with a specific ailment and not try to cure all of cancer. This gives us specific information and specific knowledge. When we have specific knowledge, we know how one thing is different from every other thing. And this knowing how one thing is different from every other thing is analogous to the manner in which we know the difference between the known and the unknown. We can look at the whole concept as science does, the concept of species and genera, which philosophy has done for many centuries. That doesn't take us very far. The key to it is, as we are trying to see, the key to it is difference. There is a difference between this and that. One might say, I know this, and it is not that, or something like that. It is actually the same if we know both. I know this, and I know this, and I know they're different. Does this sound familiar? It's something we deal with all the time. So there is a dualism between this and that. And in the knowledge that this is dualism is where we have the moment of knowing, in that kind of experience. However, it is only because this and that share the same unity that this knowledge is possible. But if there were only unity, there would be no knowledge. So that's what we're trying to get at, that knowledge and the experience of being are two different things. But the experience of being is realized in knowledge when we know the difference between this thing or that thing. We could even go so far as to say that knowledge and creative becoming depend on differentiation. Differentiation within the divine. And they depend on recognition of differentiation in the human sense. So we're doing really actually a holy thing when we are calling a spade, or when we're appreciating the value of one color or another. We could go even further and say that materialization is accomplished by division, or difference, or differentiation. But that carries us way beyond the scope of this talk again. The idea is that the separating or particularization, as far as one can carry it, makes things obvious, specific. The knowing of the difference between one thing and another in epistemology is knowledge through contrast. And it is accomplished by polarizing this thing against that. Knowledge that comes by contrast, by differentiation, by division, even by nitpicking, is ruled by Gemini in the astrological mandala. If we proceed in the other direction and realize how much one thing is like another, we are not carrying the creation out further into greater differentiation, but we are unifying. And we are seeing that two things are one. And in that comparison, that two things are one and they have something alike, we are carrying realizations back into spirit. Venus, who rules Libra, and Libra and Venus together rule comparison. This is the great unification. It is the unifying of the unknown with the known that brings them together through the creativity. It's that very same deep principle in the simplest of ways. Now, these are just a few of the many ways that we can understand the principle. And each of these ways of looking at things, or each of these examples, has millions and millions of ways to be looked at. The important thing is the realization, whether it comes from division and contrast, or whether it comes from unison by comparison, it's the realization. Every time we realize the truth through difference or through unity, we are completing the creation itself. So even if a person has a life where they just spend their entire life seeing how this is like that or how that is like that, they are completing the creation. We are realizing the truth. It's such a simple thing, but it's something that we're all doing. We as humans are creative finalizers. We bring things into the point that they are known. And at the same time, we know ourselves, but that's not really important at this point for what we're talking about. We realize, or we know, when we have that intuitive feeling of unity. In the intuitive feeling of unity, the attitude of difference and division is very different than the intuitive experience of unity and comparison, but they're both experiences, and they are both brought about by the experience of unity. Just think how wonderful things will be when we all have finalized the understanding of all of the Millard experiences that we have, and we share that, because in unity it's automatically shared. And it doesn't end just because we know something. It doesn't end when we realize something, because when we do, we know how much we don't know. So we can say that the sword of truth cuts both ways. No questions? Yes.
The first thing, when you talk about dualism, you are implying, if not saying outright, that dualism is you have the opposites in every which way, including polarity, are you not?
Classical dualism has opposites, and we're just saying that there are differences. Like, for example, on the metaphysical level, we can't possibly quantify the unknown. Hopefully, in our consciousness, we can get our consciousness around the known, and that's what a mystical experience is. You don't know it in specific detail, but you know everything. You know, it's the experience, the unity of everything. But that is a kind of a quantification. It's not like counting from this piece and this piece and that piece. But you don't know. It's not necessarily a symmetric dualism. In classical dualism, it does tend to be symmetric, but that's has more to do with with an attitude of mind or an attitude of philosophy.
I think this would be a good topic for discussion sometime. Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
How do you know there's an unknown? I mean, you say commonplace truth. We don't know certain things, but that doesn't mean there is an unknown. It's just that we haven't learned it yet. So there is a difference between those two things. So I want to know, on a metaphysical level, how is...
From a metaphysical level, your question is not a metaphysical question. Your question is, when you say that do we know that it just isn't something we don't know yet, that is with the kind of knowledge from this human perspective. When you have the knowledge or when you have the experience of complete unity, there is not that that perspective of a human that there's more specific things to be known that are already there. This is something. Okay, you look like you're wanting to say more.
I was talking about when you said we can't quantify the unknown.
Yes.
Why would you say there's an unknown? That's kind of a metaphysical statement.
Yes, saying that there is an unknown is a putting into words something that one senses, but isn't necessarily a thing. When you say there is an unknown, that is you have a conception of that. And that conception is based on our limited human experience, where we come to know something that we didn't know before, and that conception then we try to generalize to the universal or to beyond the universal, and we don't know that. We really don't. The conception of something is much easier than the reality of what is trying to be conceived. Some people would say that this is all hocus pocus, that there is no unknown at all, and that you're dealing only with conceptions.
So how do you know things you think you know?
In the intuitive experience.
Yeah.
This is what I've been trying to say all night, I hope. Yeah. All right. Yes.
Yeah, I realize that with intuition you can tell if something's an intuition because when you scrutinize it, it expands.
Yes.
But if something is not an intuition and you scrutinize it, it vanishes.
Yes.
It does not expand.
Yes.
So that's one experiment
Yes.
for knowing whether something is really an
And
intuition.
intuition always, if you can sink yourself into it, always gives a way that it can be proven.
Yeah.
Certainly to yourself, at least.
Another question. To try and bring this down on a more practical level, I'm thinking that what you said about a polarity or a differentiation of two things, could an analogy to that be sitting quietly and looking at a flower, and it's your observation, your energy, and there's the flower, and you're sitting with it and sitting with it and sitting with it, and eventually, this has happened 3 times in my life, with a flower, with the stars, and with another object, that there was a unity and oneness that just overwhelmed me with joy, where the direct intuition as a thought, which wasn't really a thought, was that I was one with the whole universe.
Yes,
And the
that's
whole universe was one for me.
that was, I think, just an experience of everything is in everything.
Yes, okay.
What we're talking about is intuition that comes about, and the creative process that comes about in the seeing of difference or seeing of commonality.
So on what level then is this seeing that you're speaking of? Is it the kind of observation of an object, like I said, looking at a sunset, or are you talking on different levels? And in your level of meditation?
I've tried to laboriously have tried to keep this to 2 levels.
Okay.
That is pure unity and everything else. A state of supreme being and nothing more than being.
Okay.
Yeah. Eventually, it's going to take years to get into when you're talking about specific levels and different kinds of the principles involved in your question. Like the next time we meet is going to be a much simpler principle.
Okay.
But it's one that again, everybody understands universally, and the one that you just now put forth in a statement will be 2 meetings from now. We're going to have a few, maybe a dozen basic principles that if you keep them in your consciousness all the time, that you can't help but progress forward spiritually.
Okay, thanks.
Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.